A missile was in the air. The target? A U.S. nuclear base. The world held its breath. Seconds felt like hours. Military alarms were going off. Soldiers were scrambling. And somewhere high above the ground, a NATO defense system was tracking that missile, waiting for the perfect moment to act. This was not a drill. This was not a warning shot. This was a direct attack on American soil, and the world was about to change forever. Right now, we're going to break down everything that happened. Who fired the missile? Why Iran made this dangerous move? How NATO managed to stop what could have been the most devastating military strike in modern history? And most importantly, what happens next? Because this story is far from over. To understand what just happened, you need to go back. Not years, but decades. Because the tension between Iran and the United States did not start last week. It did not start last year. It has been building for a very long time, like a pressure cooker with no release valve. And on this day, that pressure cooker finally exploded. For years, Iran and the United States have been locked in a cold and dangerous dance. They have never directly gone to war with each other, but they have come dangerously close. More times than most people realize, there have been proxy battles fought through other countries. There have been assassinations. There have been economic sanctions that crushed the Iranian economy. There have been threats made on television, in speeches, and behind closed doors. Every single time the world watched and wondered, is this the moment things finally go too far? Well, many analysts are now saying, this might be that moment. The U.S. military base that was targeted is not just any ordinary base. This is one of the most sensitive and heavily protected military locations in the entire region. It sits in a position that gives American forces a strong strategic advantage, meaning from this location, the U.S. military can monitor, respond to, and, if necessary, strike targets across a very wide area. Losing this base, or even damaging it, would not just be a physical blow, it would be a massive signal to the entire world that America's military reach can be challenged. That is exactly why Iran chose it. Now, Iran has been under enormous pressure lately. The economic sanctions placed on the country by the United States and its allies have made life incredibly difficult for ordinary Iranian citizens. Prices have gone up. Jobs have disappeared. The value of their currency has dropped sharply. And the Iranian government has been telling its people for years that all of this suffering is because of America. So when the Iranian leadership decided to act, they were not just making a military decision, they were making a political one. They were sending a message to their own people that they are not afraid, that they will fight back, that Iran will not simply sit down and accept pressure without pushing back hard. But there is another layer to this story that most people are not talking about. In the weeks leading up to this attack, intelligence sources had reportedly been picking up unusual movements within Iran's military. Satellite images showed activity at missile launch sites. Communication signals were being monitored. There were quiet warnings passed between governments behind closed doors. Some officials reportedly knew something was coming. They just did not know exactly when or exactly where, and then it happened. In the early hours of the morning, when most people were asleep, Iran launched a ballistic missile. It was not a small rocket. It was not a symbolic gesture. This was a serious, high-powered missile designed to travel fast, fly high, and hit hard. The target coordinates were locked onto the U.S. nuclear base. Iranian military commanders, according to sources, believed they had a window, a brief moment where they could strike before a proper defense response could be organized. They were wrong, because NATO was already watching. NATO was already ready. And what happened next is the part of this story that stopped a potential war from becoming something far, far worse. The clock showed the early hours of the morning. The sky was dark. Most people on the base were either asleep or running routine night shifts. Nobody was expecting what was about to happen, at least not at that exact moment. And then, without any public warning, without any final diplomatic message, Iran made its move. The missile was launched from a site deep inside Iranian territory. This was not done by accident. Launching from deep inside the country made it harder for enemy radar systems to detect the launch in its earliest stage. Every second of delay in detection gives a missile more time to travel. And in missile warfare, time is everything. The Iranian military knew this. They planned around it. They were counting on those extra seconds to give their missile the best possible chance of reaching its target. Within moments of the launch, alarms began going off across multiple military monitoring stations. Radar systems picked up the heat signature of the missile as it climbed high into the sky. Automated alerts were sent instantly to command centers. Military officers were woken up. Emergency calls were made. The entire chain of command, from field officers all the way up to senior decision makers, was activated within minutes. This is the part that most people do not see. Behind the news headlines, there is an entire system of people, technology, and split-second decisions working together at extraordinary speed. The missile was moving fast. Ballistic missiles of this type can travel at speeds that are difficult to fully comprehend. We are talking about something moving several times faster than the speed of sound. From launch to potential impact, the window of time available to respond was extremely short. Every second counted. There was no room for confusion, no room for hesitation, no room for mistakes. On the ground at the U.S. base, protective measures were immediately activated. Personnel were directed to secure locations. Non-essential systems were shut down. The base went into full emergency mode. Soldiers who had trained for exactly this kind of scenario were now living it in real time. The training, the drills, the long hours of preparation, all of it came down to this moment. Meanwhile, NATO's defense systems were already locked onto the missile, tracking it, calculating its speed, its trajectory, its exact projected point of impact. The interception system was not simply shooting blindly into the sky. It was using highly advanced calculations to predict exactly where the missile would be at a specific moment, and then placing its own interceptor missile in that exact spot. Think of it like trying to hit a bullet with another bullet, except both bullets are traveling at extraordinary speeds, and you only get one shot. The decision to intercept was made quickly. There was no long debate, no lengthy meeting. The threat was real, it was confirmed, and the response was authorized. NATO forces fired the interceptor. What followed were the longest few seconds in recent military history. Every person monitoring the situation, from military commanders to intelligence officers to government officials in multiple countries, was watching the same thing. Two objects racing toward each other in the sky above the region, one trying to destroy, one trying to stop destruction. And then, contact. The interception was successful. The missile was destroyed in the air before it could reach its target. The base was safe. The people on it were safe. But the world was absolutely not safe, because Iran had just crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. When that missile was destroyed in the sky, it did not happen by luck. It did not happen by chance. It happened because of years of research, billions of dollars in investment, and some of the most advanced military technology ever built by human hands. Most people hear the words missile defense system and picture something simple, like a big gun that shoots things out of the sky. But the reality is far more complex, far more impressive, and honestly far more frightening in terms of what modern warfare is now capable of. Let us break down exactly what happened. In plain, simple terms that anyone can understand, NATO operates several layers of missile defense across the region. These are not standalone systems sitting in one place. They are connected networks, radar stations, tracking satellites, ground-based interceptor launchers, and command centers, all talking to each other in real time. When one part of the network detects a threat, every other part of the network knows about it almost instantly. This connected approach is what makes the system so effective. There is no single point of failure. If one radar goes down, another picks up the signal. If one interceptor misses, there's another ready to fire. The specific system credited with intercepting Iran's missile is a type of advanced ballistic missile defense platform. Without getting too deep into technical details, what this system does is essentially track an incoming missile from the moment it launches, calculate its flight path using extremely precise mathematics, and then fire an interceptor that physically collides with the incoming missile in midair. There are no explosions triggered by remote control, no fancy laser beams. The interceptor simply hits the missile with such force and at such speed that the missile is completely destroyed. Experts call this concept hit to kill, and it is exactly as direct as it sounds. What makes this particular interception so remarkable is the speed at which everything happened. From the moment Iran's missile was detected to the moment the interceptor was fired, the entire process took only a matter of minutes. In that short window, radar systems had to confirm the threat was real and not a false alarm. Data had to be processed and verified. A decision had to be made at the command level. And then the physical interception had to be executed with pinpoint accuracy. Every single one of those steps happened correctly, in sequence, under enormous pressure, with zero margin for error. Think about that for a moment. In the time it takes most people to make a cup of coffee, NATO's defense network detected a missile launch, tracked it across hundreds of miles, made a command decision, fired a countermissile, and successfully destroyed the threat in midair. That is not just impressive, that is a completely different level of military capability than most countries on Earth can even imagine having. But here's the part of this story that adds another layer of tension. This was not the first time NATO's missile defense systems have been tested in real conditions. There have been previous intercepts, previous close calls, previous moments where the system had to perform under pressure. Each of those events taught military engineers and commanders valuable lessons. They improved the system. They patched the weak points. They trained more rigorously. So, in a strange way, every previous threat that was stopped helped make this interception possible. Iran knew about NATO's defense capabilities. They had studied them, they had watched previous interceptions, and they still chose to fire. Which raises a very serious and deeply uncomfortable question. Did Iran actually expect the missile to get through? Or was the launch itself the message, regardless of whether it hit its target? That question matters more than most people realize, because the answer changes everything about what Iran's next move might be. The moment news of the attack broke, the world did not stay silent. Within hours, phones were ringing in government offices across every major capital city. Emergency meetings were being called, statements were being drafted. World leaders who had been asleep were woken up and briefed. Because everyone understood the same thing at the same time. This was not just a problem for the United States. This was not just a problem for NATO. This was a problem for every single country on Earth that depends on stability in the Middle East and beyond. Let us start with the United States response, because that is where the most immediate and powerful reaction came from. The U.S. government moved quickly. Senior officials gathered for emergency briefings inside the White House. The president was informed within minutes of the interception. A formal statement was released not long after, and the language used in that statement was deliberately strong and deliberate. The United States made it absolutely clear that the attack would not be ignored, that there would be consequences, that crossing this line carried a price. American military forces in the region were immediately placed on their highest alert levels. Additional assets, meaning ships, aircraft, and personnel, were quietly moved into position. The U.S. was not just responding with words, it was responding with action. NATO as a whole also moved fast. A rare emergency session was called among member nations. Representatives from across Europe and beyond gathered, some in person, some virtually, to assess the situation and agree on a collective response. NATO's official statement described the attack as a serious and unacceptable escalation. The word escalation is important here. It signals that NATO views this not as an isolated incident, but as part of a dangerous upward spiral, one that could lead somewhere far worse, if not addressed firmly and immediately. Now let us talk about the reactions from other parts of the world, because they tell a very different story. Russia and China, two countries that have maintained complicated relationships with both Iran and the West, responded with carefully chosen words. Neither country condemned Iran outright. Instead, both called for calm, for dialogue, and for all sides to avoid further escalation. On the surface, those words sound reasonable, but many analysts read them differently. When powerful countries refuse to clearly condemn a missile attack on a military base, that silence, or near silence, sends its own kind of message. It tells Iran that it is not completely isolated, that there are major powers in the world who will not stand firmly against it. In the Middle East itself, reactions were mixed and deeply revealing. Some U.S. allied governments in the region issued strong statements of support for America. They condemned the attack. They expressed solidarity. But privately, behind closed doors, many of those same governments were deeply worried, because a direct military confrontation between Iran and the United States does not stay contained. It spills over borders. It disrupts oil supplies. It triggers refugee movements. It destabilizes governments. Every country in the region knows that a full-scale war between these two powers would reshape the Middle East in ways that are impossible to fully predict. Inside Iran itself, the government's reaction was striking in its confidence. Iranian state media did not present the interception as a failure. Instead, they framed the entire event as a show of strength, as proof that Iran is willing to act where others only talk. State television showed crowds of people in the streets, some celebrating, some chanting. The Iranian leadership was using this moment, even with the missile intercepted, as a tool to rally its own population.